I'd say that the vast majority of the sports viewing public loves an upset. The NCAA tournament alone is proof of this. If a 16 seed is beating a 1 seed, no one is rooting for the 1 seed, outside of actual fans of that team. Upsets make for great drama, and in the United States, upsets in the NFL make for highly viewed drama. Thank you for clicking on this video. If you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button and dinging the bell icon for future notifications. I can't tell you how much I would appreciate it. Using our rating system, we have determined the biggest upsets in NFL playoff history during the Super Bowl era, dating back to the 1966 season. It's a rather simple system, factoring a team's results, performance, and quality of opponents. An average NFL team would score a 0. The 1985 Bears rate out the best during this era with a score of 52.163. The 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers score worst at negative 50.645. If this Bucs team were to defeat this Bears team, the upset score would be over 102 points. Under this system, there have been 173 upsets in the NFL playoffs since 1966, or just over 3 per season. Which were the biggest? Well, I can tell you which was the smallest. In 1998, the Atlanta Falcons defeated the San Francisco 49ers 20-18 in the divisional round. They were both very good teams that season, but the Falcons checked in with a score of 25.145 and the 49ers coming in at 25.195. A difference of 0.05, but by the numbers, an upset. We're going to count down the top 10 with special recognition to a game that just missed making the list. The 1996 AFC Divisional Round between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Denver Broncos. This was a game I thought for sure was going to make it in, and when it went down, it did rank as the 5th biggest upset in playoff history with an upset score of 22.759. But 6 games have since passed it, knocking it out of the top 10. Here now is that top 10. In their 21st season of existence, this was the Saints' first ever playoff game. And even though they were in the wild card, they had the NFL's second best record in 1987. They were 12-3, finishing second place in their own division behind the San Francisco 49ers. The Minnesota Vikings, on the other hand, were only 8-7 and outscored their opponents during the season by a single point. But in a weird 1987 season, they came into the Superdome and shut it all down. The Saints did score first, but the Vikings took a 10-7 lead on an 84-yard punt return by Anthony Carter. At that point, it was pure domination, punctuated by a 44-yard touchdown pass from Tommy Kramer to Hassan Jones to end the half, giving the Vikings a 31-10 lead. It was an upset anyway, but that final score of 44-10 made it even more stunning. The Saints were still good for the next few seasons, but never could win a playoff game under head coach Jim Mora. They did finally get one in the year 2000. As far as the Vikings go, there's more to their story. The St. Louis Rams ran roughshod over the NFL this season and the prior two. Super Bowl champions in 1999 and back in the big game in 2001. In those 3 seasons, they scored 1,569 points for an average of 523 per season and over 32.5 points per game. They finished this season 14-2 and were heavy favorites in the Super Bowl. The New England Patriots were down to a backup quarterback and they were 5-5. But they got hot at the end of the season, and they slipped their way to 2 playoff wins to make it to the Super Bowl. The Patriots did have one clear advantage though, coaching. They had Bill Belichick on the sideline while the Rams had Mike Martz. The Patriots led 17-3, highlighted by a Ty Law 47-yard interception return. The Rams stormed back to tie it in the fourth quarter before Adam Vinatieri hit the game-winning field goal, giving the Patriots the 20-17 victory. After this season, the Rams mostly fell apart, while the Patriots went on to win 2 of the next 3 Super Bowls. This battle in the wild card round of NFC East teams in a very weak NFC East pitted the Cardinals against the Cowboys. The Cardinals finished 9-7 with a negative 53-point differential. This was a worse point differential than 6 different teams that missed the playoffs. They were one of the worst teams to ever make the playoffs, especially in our rating system, but make it they did. The Cowboys won the division the year after missing the playoffs and 3 years removed from their dynasty. The Cowboys swept the Cardinals during the regular season, but on this day in Dallas, the defense of Arizona was basically unassailable. They were on their way to a 20-0 shutout victory, but Deion Sanders returned a punt deep into Cardinal territory, allowing Dallas to score from a short field for a final score of 20-7. To date, the Cowboys have yet to return to the NFC title game. Arizona gave it a go in the next round against Minnesota, but lost. This was their first playoff win in 51 years, and their last playoff win as a member of the NFC East. These are the Tim Tebow Miracle Broncos, an 8-8 team that won 5 straight one-score games, including 2 in overtime, that, despite a 3-game losing streak to end the season, still won the laughably weak AFC West with a ghastly negative 91-point differential. The Steelers, on the other hand, were defending AFC champions who were unfortunate enough to be in a division with the Baltimore Ravens. And despite going 12-4, they had to settle for a wild card. Moreover, they had to travel to Denver for this game, and the Broncos exploded for 20 second quarter points and still had a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter. But Pittsburgh tied the game and sent it to overtime. This was the first test of the overtime rules, wherein it was no longer straight sudden death unless the team that got the ball first scored a touchdown. Well, that test was immediately put to bed with an 80-yard touchdown pass from Tim Tebow to Demaryius Thomas on the first play of overtime, giving the Broncos the 29-23 lead. The Broncos got shellacked by the Patriots the next week, signed Peyton Manning, and then went to the Super Bowl 2 of the next 4 seasons, winning 1 of them. The Pittsburgh Steelers, of course, have always remained in contention, not once suffering a losing record in this time. If you had heard of a football game nicknamed the Mud Bowl, I would think Los Angeles would be the last place you would expect that game to be. Well, that's what happened in this 1977 playoff game as the LA Rams hosted the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings were the defending NFC champions and had been to 4 of the previous 8 Super Bowls, losing all of them. And despite this season not being their best, they were able to get a 9-5 record and win their division. The Rams were always good in the 70s and could never take advantage of that, often losing in the playoffs and often to the Vikings. At 10-4, they allowed the second fewest points in the NFL, only trailing the legendary Grits Blitz defense of the Atlanta Falcons. The offense didn't always show up though, and that was especially true in this game. The Rams smashed the Vikings 35-3 in the regular season, but in these muddy conditions, the Vikings came out and ran the ball effectively. The Rams did score late to make it 14-7, and then recovered an onside kick and had a chance to tie, but they threw an interception in the end zone, ending it at that 14-7 score. The Rams finally did break through to the Super Bowl 2 seasons later. The Vikings lost the next week in the NFC Championship game, and despite several more NFC Championship game appearances, to date have never been back to the Super Bowl. In this season, its 100th, the NFL's most dominant team were the Baltimore Ravens. They led the league in scoring, they ended the season on a 12-game winning streak, and had a historically great season from quarterback Lamar Jackson. The Tennessee Titans at various points in the season were 2-4 and 4-5, but they did make it to the playoffs as the bottom seed with a 9-7 record. They won at New England the week before, but they were substantial underdogs against a team that could have been an all-time great if they won this season's Super Bowl. But they're on this list, so obviously they didn't do that. The Titans had 300 yards of offense in this game, and Derrick Henry was responsible for 205 of them, including a 3-yard touchdown pass to make the score 21-6. The Ravens weren't able to respond, and they lost this game by a final score of 28-12. The Titans in the next week took a 10-0 lead in the AFC title game against the Chiefs, but their offense was too much and they didn't turn it over like the Ravens did, and they lost that game. They've been middling ever since. The Baltimore Ravens haven't fallen off by any means, but they've not yet reached this level. This might be the NFL's most famous game, maybe only next to the 1958 Giants-Colts NFL Championship game. It is the most famous upset of all time, partially due to Joe Namath, but it lands on this list at number 4. The Jets won the weak AFL East that had no other winning teams. They had to play the Raiders in the AFL Championship game, who had to play an extra game because they were tied with the Chiefs at 12-2 at the top of their division. And even then, they only barely beat them 27-23. On the other hand, on the NFL side, the Colts dominated to a 13-1 record with an average margin of victory over 18 points. Joe Namath was famous for making the guarantee before the game, but the Jets certainly did not win the game because of him, despite his being named the MVP. They were carried by a powerful, consistent running game with 5 defensive takeaways to win the game 16-7. It appears whatever miracle the Jets needed to win this meant they would never win another Super Bowl again. In fact, to this date, they haven't even been to one. The Colts, on the other hand, moved to the AFC in 1970 after the merger, and in that first season, they won the Super Bowl, which was their final ever appearance while in Baltimore. This game is remembered for exactly one reason: the Beastquake. The Seattle Seahawks not only have the lowest rating of any team on this list, they have the lowest rating of any playoff team ever. They were 6-9 going into their last game against the Rams, which they won to finish 7-9 and to win their division. They did so with a negative 97 point differential. That is to say, on average, they were outscored by 6 points every game. The New Orleans Saints were defending Super Bowl champions, and they were still good at 11-5, but they weren't as good as they were the previous season, and had to come into this game as a wild card. Playing in Seattle, it was a high-scoring game, 34-30 in the fourth quarter when it happened. Officially, Marshawn Lynch broke 7 tackles on this play, but it looked and felt like 20, never mind one of the greatest stiff arms anyone has ever seen. That made it 41-30, and the Seahawks held on to win 41-36. For the Saints, this was the start of many playoff heartbreaks over the years. And while the Seahawks lost to the Bears the next week, they were building something in what was Pete Carroll's first season as head coach. They eventually did win a Super Bowl, and except for getting in their own way, they should have won another one too. There's definitely some irony here. The Minnesota Vikings have historically underachieved in the playoffs, with so many excellent teams that never won a Super Bowl, yet they're on this list of upsets 3 different times. Even more so, this 1987 team is now on the list for the 2nd time as we looked at them beating the Saints in the number 10 spot. They beat the Saints, who had the 2nd best record. Now they're playing the team with the best record in 1987. The 49ers were dominant at 13-2 and looked to be coasting to a Super Bowl win. And then Anthony Carter happened. He had 257 yards of offense. The Vikings actually never trailed this game, leading by 17 at the half and by 16 in the 4th, on the way to a 36-24 victory. Incredibly, the Vikings were a drop pass away in the NFC Championship game the following week that potentially could have sent them to the Super Bowl, instead losing that game to the Washington Redskins. And as we mentioned, the Vikings have never been back to the Super Bowl. On the other hand, the 49ers redeemed themselves, winning the Super Bowl the next season, and they really dropped the hammer in winning the Super Bowl the season after that. In each of those playoff runs, they faced and defeated the Vikings, beating them 34-9 in '88 and 41-13 in '89. If any game could have usurped Super Bowl III as the NFL's most famous upset, it would be this one. Let's do a little math quickly first. That Jaguars-Broncos game that just missed being in the top 10 had a 22-759 upset rating. The Vikings-49ers game that we just saw, 30.833. This Giants-Patriots game, 39.6. That gap between 1st and 2nd is larger than the gap between 2nd and 11th. The New England Patriots, of course, were 16-0 during the regular season and 18-0 coming into this game, including the playoffs. The Giants, on the other hand, were a 10-6 team that won a wild card and only had a 22-point differential. However, the Giants' defense held the Patriots, a team that scored over 36 points per game during the regular season, to only 14 during this game. This Patriots team peaked early and wasn't quite the same as the playoffs came around. Of course, the game's ending is very well known. First you had the helmet catch, then you had Plaxico Burress' game-winning touchdown, all leading to a giant 17-14 victory. Literally a giant victory. The Patriots lost the Super Bowl to the Giants again 4 years later. The Giants, on the other hand, never won another playoff game until 2022, except for that 2011 season. They sure knew when to win. Thank you so much for checking us out. This was the channel's first sports video in a little while. Please give it a like and share it with some friends. It helps out immensely. And if you were potentially on the fence about subscribing, here's hoping this puts you over the top. As the 2023 NFL season chugs along, will we perhaps see an upset in this season's playoffs that can crack this list? I'd be looking forward to seeing that, as long as it doesn't happen to the 49ers. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have an awesome day.